vibration of creation, the cosmic hum. The eternal cyclic rhythm of earth, moon, and sun. Earth song is the ancient conversation between shore and sea. The love ballad between flower and bee. Earth song is the melody of mountains that rise and fall.
Hello, beautiful souls, and welcome back to another interview in Embody, the Empress, where we're looking at how to blossom and flourish in harmony with the natural world. Today, I have for you an extra special treat because I have Melissa Hamilton with us, who is actually an old school friend. We have known each other for many, many years. We can say decades now. Melissa.
We have been about 13, 14 when we met, I think.
Yeah, it's been a day or two. So, for those of you that haven't had the pleasure of coming across Melissa and her work before, she is the founder of Brave Feminine Leadership. She is a former CEO turned executive mentor dedicated to helping senior professional women elevate their impact, influence, and leadership. And really, the essence of everything that we're going to be talking today is about leadership and feminine leadership particularly, but we'll get to what all that is in a minute. Before we get there, Melissa, welcome firstly. Thank you so much for being with us.
Lovely to be here.
So I want to take us back in time to our schoolgirl days, thinking about that period of time. Really, it is, in my mind, it is that period of, year 9 to year 12. There's something in there during that time where we're really collecting our ability to trust ourselves, our belief in what is possible for us in the world, who we are, all of those bits and pieces. And I feel like there is the story of who we, how we feel about ourselves as we launch ourselves into womanhood from there. So just intuitively, if you think about that period of time, perhaps a pivotal moment or something that comes to mind, if we can start the story there and just we'll see where we end up.
It's so good to be here and so good to have a chance to settle into a gorgeous conversation with you. Gosh, I went down a little trip of memory lane as you were sort of asking me the question, reflecting back on some of those moments between year 9 and 12, which, I feel like I was so blessed in that period. We were both at boarding school. My parents were overseas, in Hong Kong, which is where I pretty much grew up. And so I was a long way from home, and I think I'd always been pretty fiercely independent. Boarding school might have added a notch or two to that. I loved being surrounded by friends. So all of these things, I think now I can look back on that and think actually they played to some of my strengths really early on because I get my energy from people. So that was amazing. When I think of the pivotal moments at school, I think I was such a mix. I think I was right from a really young age. I was always singled out for leadership.
Yep.
And I very, very firmly believe that leaders are made, not born. But I think part of that was I got so many experiences so early on that perhaps in a leadership sense, maybe I had a little bit of a head start on some other people from that point of view. And yet I was this curious mix of I probably gained a bit of weight in those last few years at school. So, there were plenty of boys I was sort of following around the schoolyard who weren't particularly interested in me. Hello, if there's any of them listening, probably not.
I
But
know there's going to be a lot of people listening going, who was it? What was
yeah, anyone listening will know. I don't think I was
Yeah.
very subtle about
Yeah,
any of
right.
that when I was at school. So, no secrets to any of that.
Mm.
So I think I left school, like so many of us, are just a really curious mix of confident in some areas, ready to absolutely take on the world. I never doubted, even though I had no idea what I was going to do,
Yeah.
I never doubted I was capable of just doing what I wanted to do.
Yeah.
So I did leave with a pretty strong belief.
Yeah. Were
Um,
you striving for something when you were, doing year 12 and getting exams done? Did you have a picture of what you wanted to get marks to do? Were you, no. Okay.
so for anyone listening to this, I'm sort of shaking my head as Edwina's talking then, but no, I talked earlier about getting singled out for leadership. So it was probably the one of the best and worst things that could have happened for me.
Yeah.
Because I was the house captain, what it meant was I was the only person in all of year 12 in my house who had my own study.
Mm,
Everyone else had a study with someone else in it. Now I am FOMO girl.
mm,
Right from that age, I never wanted to be left out of the action.
yeah.
So that just provided this brilliant excuse where no one ever questioned if I wasn't sitting at my desk. And so I was just wandering around, chatting to people as often as I wanted, and I really didn't put my head down and work.
Mm,
Um, Naturally pretty smart, so I
yeah.
could do reasonably well at school, but I didn't apply myself. And I think I was probably the classic early kind of achiever where when it came to time to put your foot down, I didn't put my foot down as
Mm,
much as I should. So I had early ideas of, going into, I think, law, and I think it was all about chasing success, and success at those stages was to go and do medicine or law. They were the two
yeah.
options sort of in front of us. I think law was where I initially pointed myself, but I didn't get the marks to get into it straight away.
Mm,
Took a year off after school, went and lived over in France for a year, and I went back to school over there.
yeah.
Um, and then came back and started an arts degree. And then I started working. My very first job was with Telstra in a call center. I started working, and once I started earning money, I completed my degree. I went on to start a postgrad degree in communications.
Mm,
Don't know that was ever going to lead me anywhere. PR, maybe.
yeah.
I never finished that though, because once I started earning money and then I started getting opportunities to move quickly through the company, that was it.
Mm,
I was done with study.
mm. I think, I mean, there's a couple of things there. One is that as you were talking about that, I'd forgotten that you were house captain. We were in different houses at school, but of a big group of women, just out of interest for the listener, because I think it's one of those really curious things when we are in school and there's presumptions about what people are going to do and what people are, who people are, and then we meet each other at our 10-year and 20-year and 30-year school reunions. It's really interesting from a curiosity of where life takes us. But I think, if we can look at the body of girls, you were one of the girls that was most likely to succeed in the big picture. And I was probably on the list of one of the girls who was least likely to succeed. And I say that from my own perspective. That was the picture that I had about myself, which I've come to learn was not necessarily what everyone else was thinking, but it was the story that was running in my head. But I think it's easy. It's a really good thing for all of us, the listeners, for all of us to be reflecting on who we thought we were going to be and what we thought our potential was. And none of it is necessarily indicative of what's going to play out. And, when I hear your story, I think that independence and the encouragement, certainly from your environment, the teachers and the people around you, but also from your parents having that trust in you and that faith in you. All of those ingredients went a long way to building your confidence. So you got yourself in, you were at Telstra, and then so the journey that unfolded from there.
So I had a fantastic time there. Um, I always laugh. I had a wonderful mentor who really helped me navigate so much of my career. Mentor, sponsor, people get those terms confused. He played both roles. Sponsor being someone who can get you more senior roles, a decision maker really. And the first time I met him was a guy called John, if he ever happens to listen to this, and we're still in touch today. He was new to Telstra and he walked around and he introduced himself to everyone. And I just want to give you a picture of, I was a bit arsey at the time. He came up and said, "Oh, Melissa, lovely to meet you. I've heard so many positive things about you." And I just cringe now. But my response to him at that point in time was, well, that's wonderful. And now it's time to make your own mind up. Um, and he did, luckily, and it was a positive. Luckily, he made it up positively.
Yeah.
Um, but it was an important part. The reason I tell you that is because I resigned and left. I got approached to go and join another company, and off I went. And the reason I did that was because whilst I worked in a new, fairly progressive part of Telstra at the time, when I looked around, everywhere I went, when I went off to do courses and things like that, I was surrounded by people in brown cardigans. And I literally mean men in brown cardigans.
Yeah.
And I couldn't see myself at
Yeah.
all.
Yeah.
And so I took off, really difficult. I remember resigning, almost having a panic attack in the car leaving. I had to, I had a loose skirt on, but I had to undo it and put the window down and, deep breathe my way through.
Yeah.
I was probably 22 at the time. Like,
Mm.
it was big,
So young.
so
Yeah.
young, big
Yeah.
career moment. And off I went to this company where I think every part of our experience is important, but I learned so much of how I didn't want to lead people
Yeah.
at this second experience. And enter John again because a couple of years after that, he joined a startup organization, was looking to recruit people, and he rang me and said, "What are you doing? Do you want to come and join this, risky startup, may never become anything?" And I did, not just on the word of John. I met the then CEO, Steve, who's also been an incredibly important part of my career journey.
Yeah.
Loved my very first meeting with him. And so I jumped into this really unknown, risky space. And I had a brilliant, brilliant career there. I navigated my way through. We grew when I stepped away from the organization. So I became CEO. We had about 2,500 employees. I grew it to about 5,000, looked after it globally.
Yeah.
And then, and I say this because I want people to be able to say these things. I was a really good CEO.
Yeah.
I've really built brilliant relationships with people. Of course, there's all areas we can improve, and I think you're constantly learning. But I was really good at it, and I loved it, and I was comfortable. I
Mm.
think that word comfortable is important here because I don't know what would have prompted me to move. And I didn't, well, I guess I did get the choice to move, but ultimately it was a breast cancer diagnosis
Yeah.
7 years ago now
Mm.
that gave me the chance to really pivot towards what it is I'm doing today.
Yeah. Yeah. I do think it's interesting that we almost have to preface the congratulating ourselves on our strengths with something, which is a very female thing to do. And part of, I guess, this is a good moment to differentiate when you talk about brave feminine leadership versus masculine leadership. What are you talking about? Like, what makes the difference?
Ah, leadership isn't gendered, firstly. I think all of us bring to our leadership a really important mix of traits that have probably been traditionally considered masculine and traditionally considered feminine.
Yeah.
When I talk about those, I'm talking about masculine being, driving action. Often, if it's overused, it can be ego and
Yeah.
winning, competitive, that sort of stuff. Feminine, bit more empathy, intuition, listening, relationships over tasks.
Yeah.
And I think both of us, all of us, sorry, I think all of us have an opportunity to really stretch our leadership across both because you need both. But for far too long, the accepted definition of a successful leader has been heavily associated with masculine and with male.
Mm.
And across so many leadership traits, despite the fact that women are often rated higher across so many, there's a couple of critical areas they're not. And one is strategy. And
Mm.
strategy is considered absolutely critical, particularly for senior decision-making roles like CEOs. And so we have a problem, we have a leadership problem globally where there's just not enough females in decision-making roles. And if I touch on that briefly, in the US, so if you look at the Fortune 500, only 10% of CEOs are female. So that's 52 out of 500. And then if you have a look in Australia and you look at the listed organisations here, 7 in 10 exec roles are held by men. There's roles that are considered pipeline roles through to the CEO role, and 82% of those pipeline roles are occupied by men, and 91% of CEOs are men. So there's a huge opportunity for us to recognise female leaders, but there's also a huge opportunity, I think, for all of us to flex more and to change a definition of what good leadership is. And
Mm.
so, Edwina, if it's interesting when I reflect back. I I would often get called, and it took me a long time to work out this was a compliment. Often people would say to me, "You're not a normal CEO." And I think to myself, what is a normal CEO? And their next sentence would be, "You're too down to earth."
Mm.
Took a long time for that to sink in that actually that was a compliment.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, so yeah. So anyway, that starts to touch on some of it.
Yeah.
And I guess I just got really curious when I had to make my own decision about, actively deciding not to go back into a CEO role.
Mm.
I had about 18 months of treatment for breast cancer and all the bits and pieces that people go through at that point in time,
Yeah.
and made the decision not to go back. And I still say today that was, I had to get brave enough to make that decision
Mm.
because I had no idea what I was going to do next.
Yeah.
I really
Yeah. And I want to keep that story going, but also just want to the corporate space is so unfamiliar to me. When I think about the corporate space, it's the vision is really crafted through watching movies and obviously going into offices. And I worked in real estate for a long time, so I have bits of pictures, but the leadership conversation for me is very much in the entrepreneurial space, which is quite different in small business, and often the women that I work with are solo entrepreneurs. They're not leading teams, but there's a definite leadership that's in play in order to do the work that we do. But I see that so many threads with motherhood and the ability to be a strong stand for values and beliefs and things for our children in schools, in community, in sports groups, in all these different places that leadership is perhaps not so obvious. It's not perhaps called leadership, but it is a way of being in community and in society that is not necessarily in the workplace. So, from your observation, having two older children that are now at that leaving home stage, where was the crossover, and where do you see those leadership roles in community? And do you feel like perhaps you kept getting drawn into those roles in your children's school lives as well? I'm curious.
Um, so many layers of so many questions in that, and so many things that made me sort of laugh along the way. The
Yeah.
first one was that they're at the age of moving out. I think we're a long way away. So the
Well, all right.
19-year-old daughter who told me she's moving out at 38 because that's when
Right.
her generation will be able to afford
Yeah.
houses.
Yeah, right.
Um, so, that generation are firmly focused on cost of living. And then a son in year 12. So I think they're going to be at home for a while, but it's such a great question. Leadership.
I think if I can interrupt you just for a minute, you obviously are a far nicer mother because I've got four that are similar ages, and my three have just like they just like gone.
Either that or you've done the right thing. You've prepared them. What did I hear the other day? That we are, it was a flip on the empty nest syndrome, and it was like a bird launcher. So you're a good bird launcher, and mine are still close to home.
Yeah.
Leadership doesn't need a title.
Yeah.
Leadership doesn't need a corporate structure or a title or any of those sorts of things. And did I get drawn into leadership in my kids' school lives and things like that? Not really. And I think in some cases I actively avoided it. I mean, I remember at one stage they were organising a school fair. One happened every couple of years at my kids' primary school. And I got a phone call, and it was, I think often the phone calls would go to, busy people,
Yeah.
right? Like I already was juggling a full-time CEO role and a fair bit of travel.
Mm.
And I guess I had the skills that I could probably, lead something like that. So I got a phone call, and I remember at the time just, and this has been a lifelong thing for me, learning to say no. Because I talked about I'm the FOMO person. I love to be part of
Yeah.
things, all sorts of stuff. And I love to help as well. But I said no, and it was a really important thing for me. And I provided an explanation at the time. I said, it's so kind of you to think of me, but I am working full time. I've got this really huge role, and the spare time that I've got available really needs to be about my kids, not about this. So it was actually one of those critical
Yeah.
moments for me where I opted not to try and spread myself too thin because I have a lifelong habit of doing that.
Mm.
And so I didn't. But when I think about leaders, I mean, we'll probably, if we get there, doesn't matter if we don't, but the Brave Feminine Leadership podcast, which you know all about because you helped me hatch it, I've now interviewed 200 leaders, senior CEOs, company chairs, entrepreneurs, academics, and all of us, all of those conversations are about women in leadership.
Mm.
But there's three things I can single out from those conversations and from my time as a CEO and from mentoring hundreds of women. Brilliant leaders. Firstly, they're self-aware. So they know themselves and they lead themselves first.
Yeah.
I remember interviewing David Thodey, used to be the CEO of Telstra for many years, and he said to me, he's seen so many leaders that would never reach their ultimate potential because they were not self-aware and they were not aware of the impact they had on others.
Yeah.
So they're self-aware. The second thing is they build leaders.
Mm.
It's not about them. They build leaders. They're focused on sustainability and growing people around them. You do this as a mum, you do this as an entrepreneur with a business, you do it with people you work with, but they build leaders. And
Mm.
the last one, which I think is so important, is they understand the real purpose of power.
Mm.
Power to get things done, power to make things better, power to have an impact. And that old model of leadership is power over, and that doesn't wash anymore. So it's power to make a change.
Mm. Yeah. I love your ability to say no. And I think that rather than it being something that so many women struggle with because there's a connotation of selfish or what, not enough, all of those things that go with it. It's actually the exact opposite. And what I've come to realize is, when we operate our lives from what is for the highest good of all, when we're good, when we're healthy, happy, our nervous systems are good, it is actually what is best for everybody around us, which is the exact opposite to the conversation that so many of us have been fed. It's almost like this self-sacrificing. You give and give and give until you implode, and then that's seen as the definition of success. It's like a badge of honor to be so exhausted and so worn out and so all the things. And the conversation that you're walking us through so brilliantly is a beautiful picture of how you do things the other way. You make incredible impact on people's lives, but looking after yourself first. So I imagine if if we go back to your breast cancer diagnosis and 18 months of recovery from that, your decisions coming out the other side of it, I imagine this is, like I always like to think all these things are happening for us on some capacity or another. Your direction forward in how you thought about health and the priority of health and nervous system well-being in all of these decisions was amplified. And do you see that as something that is still an enormous struggle for most women, something that
I do.
is, yeah.
I do. I wish I could tell you that I learned the lesson straight away.
Mm.
I wish I could tell you that
Yeah,
I finished my treatment and all of a
yeah,
sudden, I was off putting myself first all the time. I wasn't. And I wasn't, Edwina, because I was coming from a place of fear.
yeah.
And I know that now. I didn't really know it at the time, but I made this decision, okay, I'm not going to go back to the CEO role and I'm going to point myself at company director roles. And that is one of the things I do today.
Mm.
But I pointed myself in that direction. And in the meantime, I was incredibly lucky. I had so many people reaching out saying, would you consult for us? Would you do this? Would you do that? All sorts of opportunities came up and they were amazing.
Yeah.
And I said yes to all of them. And I said yes from a place of fear, not yes from a place. And it was purely because I thought if I don't, maybe they won't remember me again and then there won't be these opportunities here. So 12 months down the track of doing that, I was absolutely exhausted, as flat as I've ever been. And that was the point where I think I was then like, whoa, you have not learnt the lessons you need to learn. And it was a really important moment for me. I see this in so many leaders that I work with who, and we'll talk about, they've reached this pinnacle of success
Mm.
and they're exhausted, success, but they're utterly exhausted. And so for me, that was how I kind of just started this whole transition journey where actually I started doing yoga over summer and I did it every single day over summer. It was outside and it was in Sorrento Yoga in the Park. There might be plenty of listeners who know of that. And it was the only place I felt calm. I just had this constant agitated kind of feeling going on because I didn't know what was next and I didn't even really know which direction to point myself in. And it all started with yoga. So it actually all started with, I think, taking control of cortisol and stress and it was from that place that then I was able to start accessing because when you're in that high stress, you're in your left brain thinking. And as executives or leaders of any sort, we spend so much time thinking our way out of problems. We're in our head.
Mm.
I had to get out of my head. I had to
Yeah.
get to that right brain side, creative thinking where I could start to see options and solutions and explore different things.
Yeah.
And well, that was where Brave Feminine Leadership came from.
Yeah.
A desire and curiosity to know why we didn't have more female CEOs. And it's turned into this incredible thing.
Mm.
Now I do take care of myself, but it's a constant reminder to do it.
It's interesting. I there's another guest in this series, Judy V, whose story is very, very different to yours, but part of the marketing that we put alongside of this series is really was inspired by, for myself, by the Dalai Lama saying the world will be saved by the Western woman, and it's something that's played in my mind for many, many years. And she put out a post and she said, I'm not so sure that it's about saving as it is about remembering. And it was just one of those things where I looked at it and I thought, well, I'm not sure where she's going with this. I don't feel like I really understand it. And as my best thoughts always do arrive in the shower, I had this vision, and the way that my brain works is I see things, and it's like little movies play in my mind. And the vision that came through was the sense of humanity running towards a cliff. And it is this frantic go, 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 grab the next thing, the next thing, the next new thing, the next pill, the next operation, the next diet, the next job, the next, like there's this kind of frantic grappling for the thing that's going to save us from feeling like we're getting left behind or we won't keep up. And then it was just when the word remembering gave this sense of everybody just stopping. And so when you talk, like the cliff's there, but all we have to do is stop running. And so when you talk about doing yoga, in my mind, that is stopping running.
That's what I
It's
did.
this stillness, it's this quiet, it's this time to just be in our bodies. And it's so ridiculously simple that I think most people let it fly in one side and out the other without understanding the enormity of such a simple decision.
Yeah, a simple decision, but not that easy to
Yeah.
do, So
Yeah.
simple, um, but that's when, all of these thoughts come up and all of these things that, you've got to choose to sit with. And I think often we keep running and keep moving to not have to do that. That visual's so beautiful. I had a really interesting one. And I think it was thinking about this conversation probably, but I lost my gorgeous mum a couple of years ago, which was a huge, huge wrench for me and still is. And I constantly think to myself, and this is kind of a bit of a leadership thing, I constantly think to myself, oh, I wish I'd asked mum that. Or, it's just little things like that.
Mm.
And I just had this moment, and I was watering the garden last night when I had this kind of moment where I thought, it's so fascinating for me to think that all of these words of wisdom, all of this knowing that mum had, well, actually, that gets to be me now.
Mm.
And that gets to, I get to share that with my daughter and with all these other things. So I don't know about the Western woman saving the world, but I think about women. There's just such a strong, collective, powerful knowing
Mm.
that I think if we can give ourselves that luxury of
Yeah.
stopping and slowing down a little,
Yeah.
uh, maybe we don't run off the
Yeah.
cliff.
Do you know, I think that potentially it is the Western woman, and here's why. But it's not all. There's a consciousness to it that is very different to the unconscious rolling through life without pausing to give these things thought. Because there is an enormous difference between entitlement and privilege. And we are so privileged. But when that privilege comes with gratitude, when that privilege comes with the acknowledgement that we're in a position to make a difference, it's a very different conversation to the entitlement. Well, I can't believe there's not more car spaces near the door. I've got to walk all this way. Or I can't believe I've got to wait in line for half an hour. I can't believe, like that's the entitled stuff that is easy to fall into. It is because we have so much. I can't believe can't get the toilet paper I always buy. I'm standing in the supermarkets with, you know, millions of people across the globe that don't have toilet paper, the most basic things, but when we can see our privilege for what it is, the privilege of having an education, the privilege for having access to these conversations, the privilege of being able to reach out and ask somebody for help, the privilege of all of these things, if we can marry that with a higher purpose that we're here to be of service, to make an impact, then I do believe that we can save the world. I do.
And that make an impact is that's the driver behind so many of the women I work with.
Mm.
They want to make an impact. That's why they want to lead. That's why they want to be in these decision-making roles, because they actually want the chance to make a difference.
Mm. Yeah. Yes. And that's when selfishness becomes selflessness. And it's this altruistic approach to, what is for the highest good of all. And when you take that in a leadership position in a community, whether it's in a sporting group or in a corporate business space or wherever it is, then the culture becomes something completely different, which you talked about before. It's not the domination, it's more the synergy of working together as a team.
So I want people to keep imagining leadership in a different way, because my fear is as long as we associate leadership with masculinity, women will be overlooked.
Yeah. I'm smiling because I'm like, do I go here with this conversation? But I'm going to anyway. But it was a couple of years ago now, I became fascinated with a study that was done on bonobo monkeys in the Amazon rainforest and in comparison to chimpanzees, because we're so likened to chimpanzees, if you think of it evolution or whatever you think. But bonobo monkeys are a matriarchal society. It's run by the females, whereas chimpanzees are a patriarchal society. And it's really interesting to look at the difference. And bonobo monkeys, there is no violence at all, and they spend their time having sex and eating, and like, life is really gorgeous. There was somebody that did a TED talk on it. If the audience is go and have a look, because it gives you a picture of like, is this is this what the world would look like if we as women stand up and say no more? No more to all the rubbish, no more to the dominance, no more to the arrogance and the destruction and all the things that are doing so much damage. No more to the leadership that is through shame and fear and putting people back in their box and all that kind of language and thinking. We can create a different world. So anyway, you didn't know we were going to be talking about monkeys. So you're gonna take us through a beautiful experience in a minute. But I feel like our conversation might have been pulled off course. Is there any questions, any part of your story that you feel you would like to share?
I think we've covered the gist of it. And I think the landing place for me, if you like, is, so how do I choose to use that experience to make an impact today? And I choose to do it in several ways. I choose to do it to help senior leaders navigate a transition of sorts, whatever that might look like, because very often careers get derailed, and sometimes for ways outside of our control. So I help people in that space. And then the second one is I work with incredible, CEOs, senior leaders, and help them just nail their roles. And I love it. So I do it one-on-one and I do it in groups, and I just feel incredibly lucky to be in a space where I get to do that.
Yeah.
And so today, what we will do you want me to lead on into what we're going to
let's do that.
So,
let's do that. So I'm gonna hop off and I'll put it on speaker view, and I'm so excited to go through this with you. And then when you're finished, I'll be back.
Come back in. Fabulous. So where we're going to go today is continuing on with the theme of brave feminine leadership and the conversation we've been having, but we're going to talk about success on your own terms. So let's just start with this. I just invite everyone listening or everyone watching just to reflect on this yourself. And no matter what leadership role or what it is you're doing, the question really is, have you ever worked ridiculously hard for something? Whether it be a title or a business opportunity or a salary or recognition or something like that, only to realize that it didn't feel as good as you thought it would actually feel. Or maybe you've hit a point right now where you're questioning, well, wait, is this even what I want anymore? And we don't talk about this enough, but a lot of us get so fixed on a version of success that we set years ago, or worse, one that someone else handed to us. And we don't even stop to ask, is this my definition of success? Does it still fit? Am I spending my life, my time, my energy, and my attention on the right things, or just on the things that I've always done? And so that's what I want to talk about. And I'm not here to tell you how to define success. But I'd love to be here to help you pause and just to spend a minute just to think about it for yourself or start that journey so that you can stop working so hard for things that maybe don't even matter to you anymore. So let's do this together. So firstly, let's fast forward. And you can feel free to close your eyes now if that feels comfortable for you. But let's just imagine it's your retirement dinner. Whatever you're retiring from, could be moving into a new phase of life. But you didn't think you needed this event, but here it is. And as you step into that room, suddenly it hits you and you realize this does matter. All of the people who've walked this journey with you are there. Your colleagues are there, your team's there, your family's there, the people you've led and the people that you've mentored. And 3 of them are about to stand up and speak about you. Not about your job title or your achievements, but about you as a person and about you as a leader. Just want you to reflect, how did you shape their careers? How did you challenge and support them? And how did your leadership change their lives? Can you picture those 3 people? Would they be lining up to speak? What words would they use? And what kind of energy would be in that room? Because here's the thing, you're already writing that speech with every decision that you make and every interaction that you have and every time you step forward instead of stepping back. So I just invite you to take a moment, and if you are watching or listening, I just invite you to pause and just write down 3 words. What 3 words will you hear from those 3 people that might stand up at your retirement dinner? What do you hope they'll say about you? Because when you leave this session today, I want you to ask yourself, am I leading in a way that makes this true? Now, you can continue to keep your eyes closed if you like, but let's zoom in. We're not at retirement now. We're at the end of this year. And for us, that's December 2025. And you're looking back on the best year yet. You made some bold moves this year. You took some risks. And you cut out some things that weren't working. What are you most proud of? What goals did you actually achieve? What new skills or habits changed the game for you? And how do you feel waking up every day? So just pause here and just make a few notes. Just gut instinct. What are the main things that have jumped out at you? Most people say that they want to be successful, but they never actually define what success looks like for them. What image comes to mind for you when you think of the word success? Without a clear definition, without being intentional about success, people tend to take every opportunity because they should. Or they chase that next title or the next role or the next big thing without asking why. And they keep adding to their plate instead of cutting things that don't fit anymore. And then one day they look up and they think, how did I even get here? And that was my story. And I shared it in the conversation with Edwina earlier after I finished as a CEO and I started taking on every single opportunity that was offered to me, coming from a place of fear. I just wonder if that sounds familiar to you. And this happens because we get locked into someone else's version of success. An old boss, a mentor, society, even our past selves. But success has to be yours and it has to fit with where you are right now. Which brings me to this. Most of us fall into 2 categories with success. outside in. And this is when we let the outside world define what success looks like. And this is where it can be the title, the salary, the house, the right job, the right life, the right LinkedIn profile or Instagram profile. The trouble is it's a moving target. And so you get that thing and then you immediately start chasing the next thing. You know, and I think of stories of so many leaders who I've worked with who've spent years climbing ladders, finally got the job that they thought they always wanted, and 6 months later, miserable. Because it wasn't her version of success. It was just one that she thought she had to pursue. And then there's inside out success, where you pause and decide what matters. Maybe it's thinking about working on projects that really light you up. Maybe it's flexibility and freedom and creating impact. Maybe it's being so damn good at what you do that people notice. Another leader I work with took complete control out of this. She stopped chasing what she should do and instead stepped forward and asked and co-created a role that really aligned with her values. And instead of chasing endless promotions or the next big thing, she stepped into work that made her feel alive. So just pause and think about your own definition of success. I know so many of us grew up with the definition that success is about persistent hard work. And our environment supported that. You know, we went to school, we did homework exams, we were graded. Our parents or guardians responded to that grade as a measurement of how hard we'd worked to achieve it. And then we head off to work and we've got all these performance indicators that define how successful we've been. And so if we think about that outside-in approach to success, we've potentially grown up with all sorts of limiting beliefs or values that we place on ourselves that might influence our own personal definition of success. So the question when you think about success is to think about, is it your definition of success? And there is no right or wrong answer. But the question is, are you operating from an outside-in mindset or an inside-out? And what's actually important to you now, not 5 years ago, but today? Again, I invite you to pause and write that down. The real success strategy is about knowing where you're going. And I bring this from all of my corporate experience, where we know from business that no successful company just wings it. You know, strategy always starts with two things: a clear vision of where you want to go and a really honest look at where you are now. And then you can start making choices, real deliberate choices about what will actually move you forward. And so think about, it's not just about your career or business or leadership. Think about family and friends and health and all those other things that are important to you. Have you defined your vision for them, or are you just taking opportunities as they come? Are you making choices, or are you just saying yes to whatever's in front of you? And have you taken a step back? That beautiful pause that Edwina and I spoke about. Have you taken a step back to assess what's actually working and what's just keeping you busy? And this is so important. Choosing what not to do. And let me say this really clearly. Choosing what not to do is just as important as choosing what to do. So many high-achieving women that I work with struggle with this because we can do so much, and often we don't like to ask for help. But just because you can doesn't mean you should. What if you said no to those projects that are draining you? What if you stopped trying to prove yourself in ways that don't matter? And what if you actually made the space for things that light you up by cutting out the things that don't? So take a minute and just pause and write down, what am I saying yes to right now that I don't actually want? And what would happen if I let that go? I asked you to reflect back earlier on the end of this year. the sort of leader that you wanted to be, and the things that you did that made the year so successful. That leader that you're talking about, that you're reflecting on, it's not a different person. She's already here. Leadership isn't something that's handed to you, it's something that you forge and create through your decisions and through your action and through the moments when you say, this is who I'm meant to be. So as you close out this session, ask yourself, what am I going to stop doing? What am I going to double down on? And what's one bold, intentional choice I can make this week to move towards my vision of success? So go and be that brave feminine leader that you're meant to be. Thank you for spending time with me.
It just brings up so much. I'm just realizing the sun's hitting my face and I'm doing a washout. Probably better for those listening than watching. I read a book that you've probably heard me talk about a year or two ago. I ended up doing a series on it, Lost Connections. I'm going to pause this for 1 second and lower a curtain. Just hold on.
I can still see.
I've just closed a curtain so that I'm not too washed out. The book was Lost Connections by Johann Hari, who is a journalist looking at why we're becoming more and more depressed and anxious and all the things. And he talks about intrinsic values versus extrinsic values, which you've in other language you've talked about either outside in or inside out. And I just wanted to highlight this because it gave me language that was very powerful in how I think about things. And you're talking about definitions of success, and as a society we've been taught the definition of success is to have a certain prestige in our businesses, to have the husband, the children, the bank account, the car, the house, the right shoes, and it's like all the things that are the external markers of success, versus putting the weight and priority on the intrinsic value of being altruistic, being kind, being thoughtful, humility, generosity, loving,
Putting yourself first.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So I think I just wanted to highlight that with another voice, because I know sometimes when we hear this from different angles it lands differently. And the other thing that was so incredibly powerful that you said is choosing what not to do. And my observation is, for most women that I work with, most women in these communities, women that can do everything, but because we can do everything, it doesn't mean that we should do everything. And I think this is one of the most powerful things. And I think even to have those words written up somewhere where you see them every day until it becomes part of the way that we think is a very powerful exercise.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
It's where I start with everyone, Edwina, whether I'm talking to people about supporting them in their career or otherwise. The very, very first question always is, what does success mean to you? And if it's in a work context, I get people to get really clear about, what does that mean? What do others expect of you? What is success? Because people can get back-to-back diaries, working at 10 o'clock at night because they're trying to be everything, fill every gap, do everything. And that spills over into the rest of our life as well. So subtract, don't add, get super clear on, the things that really, really matter, and then put your energy behind them. And once you've got that momentum going, you're on fire.
Yeah. There was, I'm sure you're familiar with Dr. Maya Angelou and her work. And she had a saying that she had was, I like who I am, I like what I do, and I like how I do it. And at one point, I used that as my definition of success, in so much as I'm proud of who I am, I'm proud of what I do, and I'm proud of how I do it. And I've used that over the years as sort of a way to reset when things go wrong or things are not what I'm hoping they will be. But if I can still say at the end of it, I'm proud of who I am and I'm proud of what I do and how I do it, then it kind of gives me that recheck, that touchstone.
3 words. So I have 3 words for myself that I just keep on a post-it note. You guys probably can't see those, but the 3 words are align.
Yep.
So it's for me to check, is it aligned with where I want to be and what I want to be doing? Elevate
Yeah.
and radiate.
Love it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And they're to keep me in check because I'm just like so many of these other people that we're talking about where there's so much we can do. There's so many distractions coming at us all the time.
Yeah.
It's easy to kind of just drift through those
Yeah.
rather than to stop and be intentional. And I just would love to invite people to be intentional.
Yeah. Absolutely. I know you've got a beautiful gift for our audience. If you want to take a minute to let them know what that is.
I do. So I assume they'll find it in the link to the show, a link to what I call Balance Your Brave. And it's a starting point, it's a guided session, take about 7 or 8 minutes for someone to go through it. And it's really a chance to work out. I talk about some of that noise, I talk about some of those things that are going on. And when we show up in life as a leader in all sorts of situations, you don't just turn on leader you and turn the rest off. You take all of it with you. So this is just a really simple way to work out what is all that noise and what are some really simple actions you can do that will have a huge impact to help you feel calm.
Yep.
And I think that's such a beautiful word, calm.
Oh my goodness, yes. Yes. So, speaking of calm, I've got one final question for you to round up this beautiful conversation, and that is this. Where are you and what are you doing when you feel that sense of complete calm, joy, and harmony with the world around you?
I have so many different moments like that, and I'll share in a minute because I tried to bring that into every day rather than just have one space I go to. But I did go to Japan with my family recently, and I did have the chance to just have all of us spend so much time together. And actually, it was really simple things there where I just soaked those moments up and absolutely loved it. But for me, what I do is I go for a walk every day.
Yep.
And it's become a real habit for me now where if I see a beautiful flower, I stop and I take a photo of it. And it's just that moment of making myself present, that moment of thinking about nature and how absolutely gorgeous it is. I smell the roses.
Yeah.
And that's actually it's really important for me. My camera is full of photos of beautiful, beautiful flowers. That's where I am.
Yeah. It's interesting, isn't it, how these sayings like stop and smell the roses or put your own oxygen mask on first, or they become sayings that we don't connect to the true meaning and depth of wisdom behind them because they've been around for generations for a good reason because there's wisdom in it. So yeah, stop and smell the roses.
Thank you, my gorgeous friend. What a lovely, lovely conversation.
Thank you so much. It's been an absolute pleasure. All right, beautiful souls, that is it from us for another interview in Embody the Empress, and we will see you again soon. So much love. Mwah. Bye for now.